You ever heard that old saying at the end of tournaments, oh, if I had one more turn, I'd have had you? Well, Dialga's here to tell you, prove it. Check out Dialga VSTAR. When it's time to flex on your opponents in Top Cut this season, or even just upgrade your TCG accessories, make sure you're checking out inkgaming.com. They have a wide variety of custom playmats, custom dice bags, face masks, as well as mouse pads too, and a grip of sleeves and dice and deck boxes, all your TCG accessory needs. And you can use the code DADSPOD10 at checkout for 10% off your entire order from inkgaming.com. Your game, your style. One of my subscribers named Sophie on YouTube has requested that we take a look at an early deck preview of Dialga VSTAR, so we're going to go ahead and dive right into this one. Origin Dialga V, 220 HP metal Pokemon. For 1 colorless, it does Metal Coat, attach up to 2 metal energy from your discard pile to this Pokemon. Early game acceleration is cool, especially for colorless energy. And then for 3 metal and 1 colorless, you do Time Rend for 180, which is pretty powerful. Weak to fire, resistant to grass, and a 2 retreat cost. Origin Dialga VSTAR, 280 HP steel Pokemon. This dude is beefy. For 1 colorless, Dialga VSTAR does Metal Blast for 40 damage, and this attack does 40 damage for each metal energy attached to this Pokemon. So unlike Darkrai, the energy all has to be stacked on one specific Pokemon. His beefiness kind of helps with being able to take a couple hits so that you can deal more damage with Metal Blast throughout the game. But I think the bread and butter for this deck and what really draws people to Dialga is for 4 metal and 1 colorless, you can do Chrono Star for 220 damage. Then you take another turn after this one. So you get to draw a whole other card, play another supporter, hand attach another energy, and go through the motions of a whole turn without having to knock something out. It's not circumstantial like Metacham. But being able to deal 220 damage on top of it is pretty cool. Weak to fire, resistant to grass, and a 3 retreat cost, which doesn't necessarily make it the most mobile Pokemon, does it? But it doesn't make it unplayable. Now, the route we decided to go is, instead of being incredibly aggro and getting attacks off on the first, second, third, maybe not even the 4th turn, we're going to sit back, relax, and draw cards. And Zacian V allows us to get metal energy into play with its Intrepid Sword ability. Once during your turn, you may look at the top 3 cards of your deck, attach any number of metal energy cards you find there to this Pokemon, and then put the other cards into your hand. So it's great for building consistency, building hands, being able to really build a game plan. And I think because Dialga's Chrono Star attack requires so much energy, and that Metal Blast attack doesn't necessarily deal a whole bunch of damage until late game when you have a lot of energy stacked on that Pokemon, I think that Zacian's going to be an incredibly helpful partner to help you achieve that late game board state, to deal huge knockouts, to take advantage of that extra turn, and so on and so forth. And for 3 metal, it does Brave Blade for 230, and during your next turn, this Pokemon can attack. Pretty useful. I'd say that's pretty good. Now, I've elected to tech in a 1 of Zamazenta V from Brilliant Stars, thanks to my buddy Richard, who made the suggestion. Because of its Regal Stance ability, once during your turn, you may discard your hand and draw 5 cards. If you use this ability, your turn ends. It's a lot like Intrepid Sword, but you're discarding your resources out of your hand, drawing into a new hand of 5 cards, and I think the discard engine in this deck helps us tremendously. And this is an ability that can be used in the active and on the bench, as long as Path to the Peak isn't in play, and its attack is pretty good too. For 1 metal and 2 colorless, Revenge Blast deals 120 damage, and this attack does 30 more damage for each prize card your opponent has taken. Because the name of the game in this deck is to take a couple turns to set up, you may end up losing some prizes along the way, and Zamazenta only gets a little bit stronger as that progresses. Diancie is a new card that comes out in Astral Radiance, and it plays really, really well into the whole strategy we're going for here with its ability Princess Curtain. As long as this Pokemon is in the active spot, prevent all effects of your opponent's supporter cards done to your bench Pokemon. We have 3 of these teched into this deck specifically because we need to take a couple turns to set up, and this prevents us from getting bossed into the active and swung into and losing all this energy that we're trying to stack on our board state. So we play a couple of these, just keep folding them out into the active until you think you're in a position to take huge knockouts with Chrono Star. We are still susceptible to things like Cross Switcher, and Escape Rope, so make sure that you're playing a couple of this Diancie. I do play the Bronze or Bronzong line because moving that energy around after you're able to swing for 5 onto maybe a fresh Dialga or onto Zacian or Zamazenta to take knockouts with a secondary attacker that ultimately only gives up 2 prizes is really, really powerful. And because we have access to something like Bronzong, given that it moves around, metal energy with its metal transfer ability is super duper important. We will be able to benefit from utilizing things like Metal Saucer in the format, so why not play Sparkling Greninja with its secret asset ability, allowing us to discard a metal energy out of our hand and draw 2 cards with it, and then we can re-accelerate that energy to one of our benched metal Pokemon with Metal Saucer. I think it's a really good energy acceleration engine that we can have going on here, and out of all of the Radiant Pokemon, I think this and the new Gardevoir stand to be the best partner for Dialga. If you're playing a Bronzong Bronzor deck, you need to protect those at all costs, and Manaphy will prevent you from getting Gmax Rapid Flow to at least lose one of those wonderful metal transferring Pokemon. 4 Quick Ball, 2 Ultra Ball, 2 Evolution Incense. The discard engine in this is great, but we're already discarding a whole lot with the Royal Stance from Zamazenta. It might be important to preserve some of our stuff and go the comfortable route of just playing Evolution Incense versus having to discard 2 cards and getting any Pokemon out of the deck. For Metal Saucer, it's still in the format for a small amount of time. We might as well take advantage of it, and we play another supporter in this deck that's actually going to help us get these Metal Saucers a little bit more reasonably. Energy Recycler is really cool because games take so long and you might have chewed through so many resources. There are worlds where you're able to shuffle in up to 5 basic energy from the discard pile and Intrepid Sword into a fully loaded Zacian with 3 energy. And that's pretty broken. I really do like that. Adaman is a new card that comes out in Astral Radiance, and this is the partner that Metal Saucer has needed for a while. You can play this card only if you discard 2 metal energy cards from your hand, search your deck for 82 cards, and then put them into your hand and shuffle your deck. You can get rid of 2 basic metal energy and go grab 2 Metal Saucer. Although the Metal Saucer play seems the spiciest, it's not limited to just grabbing item cards. You're able to go grab 2 of any cards. You can go grab a Dialga VSTAR. You can go grab a whole Ultra Ball. You can go grab a Switch, a Rope, another energy if you needed to. It is not limited to what you can grab as long as you're discarding 2 basic metal energy. 2 Boss's Orders so we can gust everything that we need into the active. 2 Professor's Research because drawing cards is good. 1 Raihan, being able to trigger that Royal Stance attack, especially late game. We can move a little bit of energy around, but it's always necessary to recycle energy from the discard pile. On top of all that, Raihan lets you go into your deck and go grab any card that might help you set up for your next turn or just get off the attack that turn. More often than not, because we're feeding them Diancie the whole time and we're not really giving them access to things like Dialga or Zamazenta or Zacian because we kind of need to keep those in play, you are going to end up in scenarios where they've taken a couple prizes before you might have gotten off an attack. That's where Roxanne kind of plays a huge part in this deck. You can only play this card if your opponent has 3 or less prizes remaining. Both players shuffle their hands into their decks. I draw 6. They draw 2. Hopefully you can get the barrel off the field when you play this card at the same time because it might be for nothing. 1 Switch, 1 Rope, 1 Balloon. Gotta be a little nimble sometimes. The 1 of Temple of Sinnoh. All special energy attached to Pokemon, both yours and your opponent's, provide 1 colorless energy and have no other effect. This shuts down Fusion Strike energy. This makes Double Turbo energy only worth 1, and this makes Rapid Strike energy worth 1 colorless. Slows the game down to our pace so that we can get energy in play and really deal a tremendous amount of damage with Dialga. 2 Training Court just to get energy back into play. We're not necessarily shut all the way down when things like Path to the Peak come into play, but it definitely makes it a little hairier for us to kind of get to a comfortable board state. 13 energy. This is a lot of energy, but we are playing a heavy energy discard engine between Greninja and Adaman with the secret asset, as well as Adaman needing 2 basic metal energy to be discarded to actually utilize it. And the Metal Blast attack gets pretty buff with more basic energy on it. So the whole core of this deck is really get a comfortable board state, leave Diancie in the active, move your metal energy around as necessary with metal transfer from Bronzong, and then swing for the fences with the Chrono Star for 220. You don't need to take a knockout for your next turn to happen. You could deal 222 VMAX Pokemon and then hit it again with Metal Blast immediately after to ensure that you're at least taking those 3 prizes. Shaman's up in the category. You have Resistance to Grass already, being a metal type Pokemon. It plays very heavily into Dialga's game of kind of getting set up for late game knockout scenarios, where I think that plays very heavily into Dialga's favor, because late game Dialga swings so much heavier and takes extra turns and has a lot more availability to other attackers. Typhlosion, again, sets up very slow. That plays very heavily into Dialga's favor because you are needing to take an extra couple turns. But Typhlosion also spreads damage counters, and unfortunately Manaphy won't help us there. So there is potential for Typhlosion to move into the 50-50 range, but not quite. Sylveon is very good. I think with Arceus or the Rapid Strike engine, it's going to rely very heavily on your special energy. We do have the Temple of Sinnoh to help us there. And because Sylveon is weak to steel, you are able to take knockouts against something like that, and it's not necessarily able to wall you off. Same with Whimsicott, weak to steel. We don't play special energy, so we're really not set back a whole bunch of turns. If they Crushing Hammer your energy away, you're able to accelerate those energies back into play with things like Metal Saucer. When you're looking at the 50-50 matchups, you really got to take these with a grain of salt. Hisuian Lilligant, Leafeon V-Star, and Leafeon V-Max, they are all grass Pokemon. You are eternally resistant to grass. However, Leafeon V-Star has the ability to boss things into the active without using a supporter, which doesn't help us set up late game. We do have a hefty retreat cost in the form of 3. Things like Galar Mine are still going to be in the format, at least during this format, if you will, and it's going to prove problematic for Dialga to kind of get set up at an appropriate rate to inflict a lot of damage on decks like this. I don't think that plays very heavily into our favor, although we are resistant to grass. Duraludon is just too big, too fast. Things like Mustard set it up very easily. We don't play any special energy, so there are still opportunities for us to take huge knockouts and take that extra turn and so on and so forth. But I don't think it's a good matchup for us because it easily claps things like Zamazenta and Zacian, which are cards we need to kind of get through this big dude. Hisuian Decidueye I'm still up in the air about, but its ability allows it to draw up into 10 cards in one turn, which makes it a little bit easier to set up. It might take off a little bit faster than Dialga, but doesn't have any type advantage over us by any means. Ice Rider Calyrex just sets up too fast. Maybe in a world where the Shady Dealings engine has rotated out, Ice Rider might take a little bit of a backseat. But right now, I think it's just too consistent, and I think the Melanie engine, on top of being able to utilize cross switchers, puts us at a severe disadvantage. In the mirror, I think it really boils down to tech. If you get the Niantic out early, you're probably going to be able to set up a little bit quicker. I think the Royal Stance Zamazenta puts this deck in a better position to have better late game scenarios because of its rally back attack, if you will, on top of being able to help you draw into the necessary resources to keep the game moving forward. Your less than favorable matchups consist of the Mightyena Zoroark Stage 1 box, Raichu, Jolteon, Rapid Strike Urshifu. Spread decks and single prize decks are not going to play into Dialga's favor by any means. The games are still winnable for sure, but if we lose components like Diancie and Bronzong early in the game, we're at a severe disadvantage. Hisuian Samurott and Darkrai, they deal a tremendous amount of damage, and if you're taking a long time to get set up, things like Darkrai have the ability to get even larger and swing for larger numbers, and that makes it very difficult. Arceus is incredibly consistent, can use things like Cross Switchers, has the ability to go grab things like Cross Switcher with its Starbirth ability. Using the Shady Dealings and Teleon line means it can go grab the stadium at any time it feels like, so the double turbo energy isn't going to be shut off as long as you'd like. I think Arceus just has the upper hand on Dialga. I think that there's also a world where Arceus and Dialga can be played in the same deck, and I almost like the way that deck is built more, but then you create an opening for fighting decks to really capitalize on prizes early in the game, where I think sitting behind Diancie lets you set up and actually get to utilize that Chrono Star attack efficiently. Mew sets up incredibly fast. but it does rely on boss's orders and boss's orders alone to get the appropriate attackers in the situation that you need them to be. Put down multiple Diancie and you're in a better spot to set up against things like Mew and capitalize on things like knocking out a Genesect, then taking an additional turn to hopefully Metal Blast for VMAX numbers or manipulate your opponent's board state. The Temple of Sinnoh is great too, because you're actually not able to attack with Meloetta if the energy doesn't provide the psychic that it needs to get the attack off too. Your bad matchups, anything fire, Entei, Charizard, very bad for you. Gengar, single strike Urshifu, set up very fast, have a very high damage output, and they can both tech in the Umbreon's boss ability, if you will, to bring your attackers into the active that have the energy stacked on them to hopefully utilize late game. Lucario, Machamp, both don't really need to rely on special energy, so the Temple of Sinnoh tech is not going to prevent you from getting smacked really hard by those. Palkia, Suicune, Starmie, Frostmouth Box, because they have access to things like Cross Switcher to take out the things necessary to get your board state in line, get around the Diancie wall, if you will, and they just set up too fast. They're ultra consistent, and these three decks might prove very problematic for every deck in the format until Shady Dealings kind of rotates. And Rapid Strike Malamar, you don't want to let them get to a late game board scenario. You want to take early knockouts and you want to be able to have spread, unfortunately. So I really think Malamar is going to be an incredibly problematic deck. I hope you enjoyed this summary of Darkrai V-Star. I really do think it does have a place in the meta. I think there's going to be a lot more Pokemon in the future that are weak to Steel and don't really have late game scenarios and an answer for a Pokemon taking a full extra turn. Make sure you check out the rest of my videos on my YouTube. Make sure you like, comment which deck you want to see next week, and subscribe to my channel. And be sure you're checking out my Twitch over at Katana TCG. I'm streaming very intermittently right now, but we're trying to pump out some content very soon. Deuces.